This is a homage beat.
He doesn't come up to her and say, "You adulterer, you going to hell." He says, "Where's your husband?" He knows that she's committing adultery,
Right.
but how does he handle that? He does it in a way where he addresses her sin, but then he does it in a way where he's respecting her as
Right.
an individual. And I think so many people miss that, where they're
Yep.
just so heavy-handed, where it's like, no, God cared about the person holistically.
Right.
And I think most of us don't do that because it's a very tough decision. It's so easy to say, I'm pro-life, keep the fetus. And it's like, how many of us are willing to help that woman after she's had the child?
That's right.
How many of us are willing to do that? Or
That's a
how
really
many,
good
and I
point.
always shout out the Vaniers, where it's like they will go to abortion clinic and they'll say, hey, well, adopt your child. And if you know the Vaniers, they already have a football team. So I was like, I don't know if they still do that now because they got like 5 kids. But the fact that they were willing to do this,
Right.
like how many of us who wave the banner of pro-life are willing to say, hey, keep your child, I'll adopt it. And it's like, that's true gospel message right there.
Right.
And it's like so many times we don't, and it gives Christians a black eye because those are the people who need us the
Yep.
most, not to be, so condemning, but to be showing grace and mercy. So like I said, I'm glad that someone who's reading it can see I was trying to, not compromise, but at the same time show grace. So I definitely appreciate that. But I say being irresponsible with children and sex is proof that one is irresponsible with the greatest gift anyone has ever been given. I say again, gifts are anything beneficial that are unearned. What is the one thing that everyone has that is unearned? Everyone has life, and no one has earned it.
That's right.
Even if one denies a creator, they must admit that life was given outside of their control. I say, ironically, atheists aren't seen thanking science or evolution for miraculously giving life. If someone has given you something, the natural response is to say thank you. If one has given you something of great value, the giver receives what? Greater thanks. I said, God has not only given us the gift of sex and children, he has given us the gift of life. Of God, Scripture says, "You have clothed me with skin and flesh and knit me together in my with bones and sinews." This is John 10:11. If life is a gift from God, one ought to be thankful and responsible with it, because one will be held accountable to him. I say, however, if God is not the giver of life, one does not have to be thankful or responsible, because one will not be held accountable. And I ask this, I say, do you think this is a reason why most people deny God? Because if there's a God, that means that I have to be responsible and thankful for how I live my life. But if there is no God, I don't have to be. And I always, like I said, I was writing this book from apologetics standpoint. I didn't grow up in the church, so I'm very familiar of how people outside the church view those in the church, especially those who deny God. And it's like, why believe in a God, but yet at the same time, you have to admit that life came from you. You're not self-existent, so life had to come from somewhere. And I think even if you don't come from a biblical worldview, you have to admit that life is a gift.
Right.
And if it is a gift, you ought to be what? Thankful and responsible. But
That's
if there's
right.
no God, I always get mad when people think the universe or something like that. It's like, it just always bothers me, because like the universe is impersonal.
Right.
God is personal. That you can't just think something abstract. That God is the one who has given you these gifts. So, like I said, the question is, do you think that's a reason why most people deny God? Because they don't want to have to deal with the fact that they are going to be responsible for how they live their life.
I think so. And I think that we live in a world, especially now, where, like you said a few minutes ago, it's, people, I think the universe, I think this, I think that, instead of giving credit to the one who deserves it. And to your point, I do think that's one of the reasons, is because people don't like to be held accountable for their actions. So they figure, well, if there's no such thing as God, then that means I can do this, I can do that, because this is my life. The universe made me, or whatever, something wild. So yeah, I agree with that. I think that is one of the reasons. And again, we just live in this world where it's all about self. Like, people just think about themselves, very selfish instead of being selfless. And so, yeah.
And I say this because I say, in order to remove any accountability, one denies life is a gift from God.
Right.
Therefore, one appeals to what? Science and evolution. And they appeal to science and evolution. It's like they don't have to be thankful to these things because, again, like I was saying before, they're not impersonal. It's like
Right.
you thank the one who created created the universe, and it's like when we become Christians, we come to the realization that, man, I've lived my entire life not being thankful, not being responsible to the one who has given me life. And it's like for me, I'm not sure if I've shared my testimony on the podcast before, but I grew up pretty good at thinking that I was a good person. I wouldn't say there's any one major sin that stood out, but it was subtle. You know, I did what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, when I wanted to do it. It's like I was sovereign over my own life. I do how I want, how I please. And then once I was confronted with the gospel, I realized that my life is not my own. I can't do what I want, what I desire. That my desire should be for the one who has created me. And that was just a foreign concept. Like I said, I always believed there was a God. No one had to convince me that a God exists, but I didn't really care about living for him.
Right.
You know, I didn't make that connection that I'm just gonna do what I want, how I wanted to do. You know, easy to lie to my parents, steal, just do all these things where on paper it doesn't look like it's that bad, but it's like once you understand the gospel and you realize that God is a holy God, that He's not just simply going to hold you accountable for the things that you do, but even the thoughts that you have.
That's right.
And that was something that didn't connect for me, and it was like I've lived how I wanted to live. Not caring anything about God and the one who has given me life. But I don't know if you have your life prior to coming to know Christ, living in a way that wasn't giving God thanks and being responsible. And like I said, it's difficult because even as a Christian, you find yourself in those situations.
That's
I think you're more sensitive to it before.
Yep.
But you see that it's a journey, this process of man realizing all that God has done for me, where it's just like I was saying that yesterday, where I had to do financial aid for a scholarship, and they asked you a question. They asked like, what is your view of ministry? And I was saying that my view of ministry is that it starts in the home. That if you can't minister or be, a leader inside your home, how can you go outside the church or in the community and lead? And it's like, if God has given me stewardship of my wife and my daughter, and if I can't lead them, how is he going to give me responsibility with more of these things? And it's like, I've got to be responsible with the gifts that God has already given me, and at times I'm not. And this is a harsh reality that I've got to live with and deal with. But I guess to you, how have you lived life being irresponsible and unthankful to the giver of life?
Yes, sir. So, I guess for me, let's see. Like you, I grew up in church. I've been going to church since I can remember. Years. I'm 29 years old, so I've been going to church probably for 29 years of my life. So it's like I knew God, but I'd say that honestly, up until college, I didn't really have a relationship with him. So I knew him, I knew the routine. Like I was even a musician in my old church. So like I've always been in church, but I didn't live a life that was pleasing to God. I've shared my testimony at church before, and I've kind of shared it out. But prior to coming to Christ, I lived a life of homosexuality, and so not even really knowing why it was wrong, I always had that conviction that it wasn't right. I didn't know biblically where it stood. But again, it wasn't until when I was getting ready to graduate from college, honestly, that, I kind of had this moment where, God showed me that it wasn't how he wanted me to live my life. And so I guess to reel it back into how it relates to this is that because I don't feel like that I was stewarding my life the way God wanted me to, I wasn't walking in my purpose, I wasn't doing the things that God would have for me to do, I feel like that I was not really, I guess, using this gift of life to the best of my abilities, or to the level that he wanted me to. And again, as a Christian now, I don't always do everything right. None of us do. But like you said before, I think it's like once you kind of have that moment where when you come to Christ, anytime you do something that you're not supposed to do, that conviction kind of hits you. And I think that's kind of what I lacked before. Like, it was there, but it was very, the volume was low.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, once you do come to Christ, you know, because you're trying to live by his word and you're trying to live by the things that he has called us to do, it hits you harder. And so, you know, moving forward, I do try to steward this life to the best of my earthly ability, you know, having him there to kind of steer me and guide me, and, you know, trying to walk into my purpose as to what he wants me to do. And, you know, I'm getting ready to get married, so I'm about to go into another chapter of my life as a husband and a father, because we have a daughter. So, kind of like what you were saying before, like, if you can't, you know, steer your household, then you can't really lead people outside. Yeah. So, I think for me, with this phase that I'm in, it's teaching me a lot about myself, honestly. But more importantly, it's teaching me to steward this gift called life to, you know, the best of my ability, and just do things God's way.
Nah, and I definitely appreciate you saying that, because we, like I was saying before, I came out of a school where we harped on those issues, harped on abortion, harped on same-sex marriage, and it's like, it was so easy because we highlight those things. Right. And it's like, even as a man, that I'm in a covenant relationship with my wife, that God still requires that same thing of me, to be faithful to her, that we all struggle with sexual sin. Right. And it's like we kind of highlight certain sexual sins over others, whether one struggles with pornography, whether it's just looking at women lustfully, and it's just like that I've got to be responsible with the life that's given me, and that I'm supposed to do what God has called me to do. And it's like, once I devoid him out of the equation, that I become the God of my life. That's right. And it's like, that's what so many people understand. I'm of the belief that, like, people like bash religion, and I get why, but I believe, like, even the atheist has a religion of their own, because who are you serving? You just serving self. You know, it's still like, I heard one time, like, the heart is an idol factory, and it happens so subtly. Because I was even talking about children now. As precious as a gift as children are, they can even become an idol. That's true. And we don't realize it, and it's like, it shows when what we value. We don't value what God desires. We value what we want. So I say, we don't deny God. We want to be him. Yep. We want to be sovereign over our own lives. We want to dictate what we can and can't do. But it's like, that imagery is so perfect, where God is called the Father. That's right. You know, and that we have children, and we have authority over our children to tell them what to do. Not because we're tyrannical, but because we love them. Exactly. And we're saying, hey, we're trying to steer you in the right direction, because if you don't, we see the disastrous effects. Like I said, children are a gift. If you don't view children as a gift, 1.6 million children are homeless. If you don't view sex as a gift, you see STDs run rampant. Like, we always see the glamorous sides of sex, but we don't ever see the consequences. Exactly. Those are never highlighted. Nope. You know, and you see STDs, you see unplanned pregnancies, and God has already said what marriage is between a man and a woman. You don't got to worry about those things when you're in the confines of marriage. And so it's like, even though someone may not have just, and it's always crazy, because you don't want to say someone has a better testimony, but you see what God has delivered someone from, right. And you see what he can do. But it's like, again, I still struggle with sexual sin, and it's like, we look at someone who may have that inclination, and we turn up our nose, and it's like, no, the adulterer is still committing sin. Right. The fornicator is still committing the sexual sin. The one who views pornography is still committing the same sexual sin. And it's like, we live as if we will not be held accountable for how we live our lives, because our lives are not our own. They're not. And so, like I said, Rich, I appreciate it. And I hate saying the cliche, because it's like, when someone comes out, it's like, oh, you're brave, and this, that, and the third. But it's like,